I'm always rooted in love and gratitude. It always comes back to this place of love and gratitude. And for many years, I lived with the shame of being the other woman, of being the homewrecker, of being, the bitch, the slut, the whore, the
Yes.
things that people called me were just so horrible.
Wow.
And I lived through all of that, and I survived all of that. And something happened around our 10-year mark together. Around our
Yeah.
10-year mark together, I had like this cathartic moment of healing. And our relationship has never been a secret. We've never kept our story a secret, but
No.
I actually went public with our story on Facebook, and with his permission, of course.
Yeah.
And it was so beautifully received. And there were so many people who were experiencing the same.
Welcome to I Think I Can podcast. My name is Luella Young. I am a woman who believes that we, like wine, get better with age. Age brings us wisdom, intuition, and a level of sophistication that is beyond the reach of youth. I am here to tell you that living a luxuriously rich and fulfilling life is in your reach. I Think I Can podcast will teach you to think differently in order to get different results. Allow me to show you how to do life effortlessly. This podcast is for the woman who is tired of playing by the rules of society, community, religion, parents, and partners. I Think I Can is all about becoming brave, authentic, purposeful, and strong. Listen weekly and you will find yourself living a life you could have only once dreamed of. Thoughts drive our physiology, so channel your thoughts with me into a life truly worth living. Enjoy the show. Hi, excuse the brief interruption. I wanted to let you know that I have recently launched a mastermind, and I wanted to invite you to that. Now, if some of you may not even know what a mastermind is, and to be honest with you, I wasn't 100% sure of what it was either until I joined one and I saw how powerful it was. It can be various sizes in terms of a number of people that are in this group. Like mastermind is just a group of people that you're holding together. So the one I'm in right now is about 30, 40 women, but I mean, it can be up to, well, however many people you can hold at a certain time. But it's incredibly powerful because not only have I received some great personal individual coaching from it, but I've also met amazing women who have very similar fears, doubts, visions, energetics, experiences, as do I. And so we all get to share our experiences and help each other out in those experiences. So with this knowledge now, I just thought, oh my gosh, I got to give the same experience to other women out there and do it in a way that's very accessible. But as I love doing podcasts, I mean, one of the reasons I love doing podcasts is because I get to have like one-on-one conversations with wonderful experts and people that I have really connected with. The networking part of this is amazing. And I think you would have the same ability to do that in a mastermind, right? Like I'm going to have long-term friendships now for the rest of my life that plus I've received amazing expert knowledge in coaching. So I have to give what I receive, and I received this now, and I just extremely excited about it. So you might see me doing many of these masterminds. I'm not sure yet, but this one is 15, seats, opportunities, or whatever. 15 different women can join this mastermind, and it's starting March 13th. That's why I want to let you know about it now, because it's going to fill up quickly, and I wanted to let you know about it, obviously, right? All my wonderful followers, and I appreciate you so much. So here we go. I mean, you might be wondering, well, is there a theme? You know what? At this point, I think it's sort of whatever you need, if it's relationship work, if it's diet, health, fitness, if it's what following your dream actually means, anything that you want to really change in your life, like pivot, do it differently when you're fed up of doing it the way you've always been doing it. That's what I'm welcoming and inviting you to experience with me. So on that, let's get on with this episode. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to I Think I Can podcast. Today, we're recording this on Valentine's Day, so love is in the air, and we have a lovely guest today. Her name is Shilamida, and I mean, what a beautiful name. What's the origin of that name? Please tell us.
So my name was actually made up, believe it or not.
Wow.
My parents migrated to the United States. I was 6 months old, and my Russian name was Shura, and my Hebrew name was Shulamit. So when they came to the border, they were told you have to Americanize her name. So the English translation of Shura is actually Alexandra. So I should have been Alexandra, but instead they were like, we're going to name her Shilamida.
I mean, but it's beautiful, hey? It just
Thank you.
flows.
So
Yeah.
most of my life, like my younger years before I turned 20, I hated my name. I wanted to change my name. I was going to change it to Alexandra. And then I went to college and people were like, wow, that's a really cool name. And I'm like, okay, maybe I'll keep it. And now I'm so grateful because I have shilamida.com and I'm like a one name wonder, like, Oprah, Madonna, Cher. So
Right. Hey, I never thought about that. But isn't that funny? I think we all go through that, because I wanted to change my name for the longest time too. And it kind of happened in university. And I was going to take my second name, which is Tanis. And now I'm just like, oh my gosh. Luella isn't as unique as yours, but we all like being
beautiful.
different. Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell us what you do. Tell us. You're a coach, but you're more than just a coach. What do you do?
I am. I'm more of a mentor than I am a coach. I am a spiritual leader. I feel like I am a keynote speaker, a best-selling author. I help women heal from inside out. I spent 10 plus years as a licensed acupuncturist. So I'm really into holistic living clean, teaching people how to heal their bodies and minds from inside out. I have a history of being 250 pounds. I had severe anxiety and depression. I know, shocking, right?
Oh, I had no idea. Wow. Okay.
Yep. So, I believe that we are conditioned and we live this life not knowing. And until we are awakened, I feel like the awakening process takes many different processes. There is very many different levels of awakening. And so once we are able to allow ourselves to awaken, because the awakening process is not easy, once we start learning and growing and expanding, you really start to realize that we're being poisoned by what we're watching. We're being poisoned by what we're eating. We're being poisoned by what we're using. Like everything around us is emitting some kind of poison.
Mm-hmm.
And so we get conditioned that we have to heal by taking pharmaceuticals or, like doing what the government tells us to do. But when we really break it down, our bodies and our minds are created to heal themselves.
Mm-hmm. Very well put. And you mentioned awareness there, and that is so tough, right? Like when we're sort of beginning this journey, I know myself, it's sort of like, I mean, let's face it, most people walk around like, really unaware of their feelings, their emotions during the day, what others are giving off. And when you start trying to practice that, like awareness, and when it comes to relationships and how to feel into the conversation and stuff like that, but just relationships just in terms, how, what's my frequency right now, what's my energy right now, am I actually happy, am I frustrated, am I angry, like, am I worried, am I, that whole part about awareness to me was like, when I first got into it, I was like, oh my gosh, like this is really hard. Do you have any tips on that? Like during the day, what you can kind of
Yeah.
do?
So awareness is so important, and it's all about consciousness. So what we
Mhm,
don't realize is that most humans, I should say, I don't operate this way, but most humans operate 95% of the time in autopilot.
mhm,
So we are living today. Today is the thoughts that we manifested in our past, and the thoughts that we are thinking today is manifesting our future. So,
mhm,
being aware and being conscious is so important to calling in our every desire. I stumbled on manifest because I know a lot of people don't understand that word,
mhm,
but manifesting is creation, right? It's calling in our desires, or sometimes not our desires, right? Because we can manifest a lot of bad things as well. But it's so important to be aware and to be conscious. So, how do we do that? We do that by breaking the habit, right? So,
mhm,
most people, they wake up at the same time every day. The alarm goes off. You brush your teeth, you do your hair, you take a shower, you make lunch, you take the kids to school, you get in the car, you drive to work, you take the same route there. Maybe you stop at the same coffee shop every single day, right? So, we now become in a way of autopilot, right? We drive places and sometimes we're like, wow, did I just like actually drive here, right? Because
mhm,
we're so conditioned to do the
mhm,
thing, which is why I love, my life. My everyday looks so different.
mhm,
I wake up every day with gratitude. That is my one constant that I do not let go of. And the first thing I do when I open up my eyes is I thank God, the universe, the angels, the guides. Sometimes I'm thankful for my bed, my sheets, like any kind
mhm.
of way to start the day with gratitude. Somebody said to me the other day, they're like, what's the first thing that you worry about when you wake up in the morning? And I'm like, I don't worry. Like, I'm just grateful that I got another day, right? Because
Yeah.
especially today in our society, another day is not guaranteed ever.
Mm,
So waking up with gratitude is super important. And then I change up the routine. So some days I drive my kids to school. Some days I'll have my au pair drive my kids to school. Some
mhm,
days I'll go to yoga. Some days I'll go to a gym. So,
mhm.
like I make sure that I'm
Yeah.
doing something different all of the time. So I actually have to think and
Mhm,
bring myself to an awareness and a consciousness. What do I choose to do today? Right?
mhm.
So a lot of times it's easier to be in that routine, especially when you're trying to accomplish things. It's nice to be on a regimented, but when you're doing that, you're operating in that autopilot. When you're operating in autopilot, years can go by before you're like, okay, let's change this up a little bit.
Yeah, it's true. And I know, and we all love our routines, and that's exactly why we love our routines, because we don't have to think.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like, yeah, you're making yourself think. You're making
Yeah.
yourself, yeah, yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so tell us how, how you got into this career.
Yeah. So I've been in the spiritual journey for 20 years. When I was 17 years old, my father got diagnosed with leukemia. A couple years later, my mom got diagnosed with breast cancer. And I grew up in a Russian household, like I mentioned. So, Russians, there's stereotypes and
Mm.
things like therapy were not available to me. It wasn't accepted to do things like that. So I went off the beaten path and I turned to drugs and alcohol and sex and all the things to try to hide and make myself feel better because I really lived my life in fight or flight. I thought every single day that both of my parents were going to die. From 17 to 27, all I knew was the inside of a hospital and cancer centers and all the things. And so when I was around 23 years old, I first found Kabbalah. And I remember living with a roommate and I went to go get laser hair removal. It was like so random. And the girl that was doing it, she was wearing a red string. And when I was a baby, we were Jewish growing up. We wore a red string to protect us from an evil eye. So I said to her, "Why are you wearing that?" She's like, "Oh, to protect me from the evil eye." And I said, "Oh, I remember as a kid, we used to wear those." And I said, "Where did you get that from?" And she said, Kabbalah.com. So I went back to my apartment and we're going back 20 years. So if anybody that knows Kabbalah now, Kabbalah has become very big and mainstream. But 20 years ago, it was literally a one-page website and there was a paragraph. And the paragraph said, "Do you feel like you're different than everybody else? Do you feel like you've lived this life before? Do you feel like something's wrong with you?" And I was like, "Oh, yes, yes, yes."
I know. Yeah, I know. Whenever, yeah, it's like, oh my
Right?
God. Yeah, yeah.
Because I felt like something was wrong with me. I used to get high in college, and I didn't grow up religious. My grandparents were in the Holocaust, so I always say that my parents were breakaway Jews. Like we were Jewish by upbringing, but they didn't practice religion. We didn't go to temple, so I didn't even have that basis. And so I would smoke a joint and sit around with all my friends who were Catholic and Christian and had religion, and I would say, well, like, what if the Bible was written by a bunch of guys on acid? And I would be like very upsetting to the people around me, but I would challenge their thoughts and their belief systems because I
Mhm.
didn't have one of
Yeah,
my own.
yeah.
And so Kabbalah was the first time that I actually felt some kind of connection. And so I turned around to my roommate and I'm like, "There's other crazies out there like me. I'm not the only one that feels this way." And so I called the girl that did the laser hair removal and I said, "Hey, you want to take a trip to New York City with me and go to this Kabbalah Center?" And she was like, "Okay." So we went to the Kabbalah Center. We went to some event that they were having and I was all in. She thought it was the weirdest thing ever. She never went back. She just bought the red string to protect herself. And I started really engaging and I took Kabbalah 1 and I took some other classes there. And part of who I was very angry and I was very reactive. And, it made
Yeah.
sense in my life. I had gone through a lot of trauma and I didn't have a release. And so
Mhm.
the basis of Kabbalah was becoming the best version of you
Mm.
and to stop reactive behavior and to lead with light. And so from Kabbalah, I started opening myself up to other spiritual leaders like Wayne Dyer, Louise Hay. I
Mhm.
found this Americana Leadership College, which taught me how to connect to angels. And I just really engulfed myself in spiritual learning. And what had started to happen, I started to realize that we were all not brought to this planet to live 100 years.
Yeah.
Right? That
Yeah.
we all came here with certain karma, and some people were only meant to live 50 years, some people are only meant to live 20 years, some people were only meant to live 6 months, right? We go
Yeah.
through these tragic experiences, and it's so hard for us to wrap around. But I really started to understand it from a different perspective. And so I started changing my prayers. For
Mm.
all the years that my father was sick, I would pray that he would just live. Like I just wanted him to live. And I truly believe I kept him alive because he was given 2 years and he ended up living 9.
Mm.
And so the last year that he was alive, I started changing my prayers. And instead of praying for him to live, I prayed for him to do what his soul needed to do. And it changed everything. And so at
Mm,
the end, I was very connected to him. You know, in the 9 years he lived, we called him a cat because the man had like 2 heart attacks, strokes, kidney failure. I mean, when I tell you I know the inside of a hospital inside out. And so at the very end, I was so connected to him that I actually slept in the hospital with him. And I had never done that before. But I knew that his
mhm,
time was coming to an end. And shortly thereafter, his dying, 3 months later, I found out that I was pregnant.
mm,
Right after my father passed away, I had broken up with my boyfriend because when my father was on his deathbed, I had said to my boyfriend, please go ask my father for my hand in marriage. Like, I don't care if we don't get married, but just like let him have peace of mind knowing
mhm,
that I'm okay.
mhm,
And so my ex didn't do that. And so right after my dad passed away, I gave up our apartment. We left.
mhm,
And 3 months later, I found out that I was 8 weeks
mhm.
pregnant with my ex's baby that I broke up with 6 weeks prior.
Wow.
And so my life went on this whole roller coaster from there. I felt like I had to have this child because I thought that it was my father being reincarnated because I was on this
Mm,
spiritual journey. And so I got back together with the ex that I broke up with because I was scared to do it alone.
mm,
And my life went in a very different direction. And so it was a very tumultuous time for
mhm,
me.
mhm,
And it took a lot to get myself out of it. And I remember I had a new friend that came into my life, and she was at my apartment one day and she was like, you're really negative. And I was like, oh, okay. Thank you so much for saying that. And she's like, have you ever heard of the law of attraction? And I was like, I've heard of that before. And she's like, well, you keep talking about all these negative things. So you just keep attracting all of this negative stuff into your life. And that was a life changing conversation for me.
okay, and can I ask, like, at the time of your father's death then, did you feel at peace? Because I love the way, you reframed that. Instead of praying that, he was going to live, it's sort of, no, I'm going to pray that the soul is going to do what it's meant to do. And so was that a peaceful goodbye that you had with him?
It was definitely a peaceful goodbye. I was so grateful. I remember sitting next to him and he just started crying and he was like, this is the way that my father died. I sat next to my father like this. And so I felt very connected to him. And, for years, it was really hard for me. Like for
Mhm,
years, birthdays would come and anniversaries would come and all these things. But he's been gone now 17 years, and in the
mhm,
time that he was gone, I've done a lot of past life work. I've done a lot of healing work to really understand my father's life in
mhm,
this incarnation.
mhm,
And so I truly believe that my father came here because he was indebted to me from a past life.
mhm,
And so I became very at peace with that once I did
mhm,
that spiritual work. And I
mhm,
realized, like, oh my gosh, his life was really dedicated to me. And so, had he died at the 2 year marker, I probably would not be sitting here having this conversation with you right now
no.
because my life was going in a really bad way. And
Yeah.
I don't think that I would have survived, to be honest with you.
Right.
But because he stayed for 9 years, he
Mhm.
did not leave this plane until I was really footed in my spiritual learning. And I really became comfortable with that. And then he passed.
And how old were you?
I was 26 when he died.
Okay, yeah, that's a very impressionable age. And then, so, but something happened. You were very at peace with his passing, but then, I mean, I totally understand. I think what I'm getting at now is sort of, but then life happens, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh,
And
yeah.
that's like 3 months later, and the boyfriend, now life partner, so. And then your friend mentioned, there's such thing as a law of attraction. You're very negative. So how did you go from, okay, so you went from kind of like a high, life's beautiful, I'm at peace, to low, and then how did you get yourself back up on high once she pointed out that you were quite negative?
I wouldn't say that my life really went in a high.
Okay.
It took several years for, I
Yeah.
was at peace with him dying, but, I was left with the parent that I didn't feel loved me as much. And, I tried to move back in with my mom after my boyfriend and I split. I lasted 3 days and I ended up going back and staying with him because it just was so tumultuous.
Oh, wow.
And she was grieving and she didn't know how to work through her grief. And so those several years were very rocky. I didn't reach a high for a long time until I met
Yeah.
my now husband, probably. That was when, and that was, my son was 4. So 5 years after my dad passed away is when I finally was like, okay, like it was the first time that I
Yeah.
could actually take a deep breath and let it go. The interesting part about the girlfriend that I had met mentioning the law of attraction was that when I was 21 years old, I had started selling candles with a MLM. It was an old company. I don't know if they're still around. And I ended up going to like their conference. And at lunchtime, I was sitting with a woman and we were chatting. And she said to me, "Oh, there's this book. It's called The Law of Attraction. I think that you should read it." And I said, "Okay." And I bought the
Mhm.
book and I read 3 pages of it. It had no pictures. It was severely boring. And so I put it on my bookshelf, right?
Yeah.
And then at some point during those years, somebody had mentioned to me The Secret. And so I had a really hard time reading, which I'm an author. So this is kind of funny because I'm the author that doesn't love to read. But I didn't want to read The Secret. So somebody had given me a CD set. So when I was having this conversation with her and she said, "Haven't you heard the law of attraction?" I actually got up, went to my bedroom, took the book off of the bookshelf, blew the dust off of it, right? Because it had
Yeah.
been sitting there for 7 years. And then she said to me, "Haven't you ever heard of The Secret?" And so I had every excuse in the book. "Well, I don't like to read." She's like, "Well, you can get it on CD." And so I go to my dining room and I'm like, "Well, I actually have it, but I don't like to listen to CDs." And she's like, "Well, you can watch it on TV. Like there's a DVD." So I'm like, "Okay,
Oh,
maybe I'll buy that." Right.
yeah. Yeah.
And so I had every excuse in the book. And like, I almost want to shake myself now because the universe was trying to put me on my path so young. I mean, I had
Mhm.
all of the tools in front of me at such a young age. I just wasn't ready to receive it at that
Mhm.
time. And wouldn't you know it, that after she left, I read The Law of Attraction in 3 days, the book that I couldn't get through 3 pages. It took me 3 days to read it. I bought The Secret on DVD. I watched it in a sitting. And then I started connecting all of the dots. And the dot that I connected was everything was rooted in gratitude. Kabbalah
Mm.
was rooted in gratitude. Wayne Dyer was rooted in gratitude. Deepak Chopra was rooted in gratitude. The Secret
Mhm.
was rooted in gratitude. Everything came back
Mhm.
down to gratitude. And I was in such a bad place in my life that I had such a hard time being grateful, right? Where I wake up now and the first thing that I do is I thank God, the universe, the angels just for waking up.
Yeah.
Most people don't realize like that's a gift in itself, right? That there is so much to be grateful for just because we get to take a breath today. In that time, I had a really hard time being grateful because I lived in a small 2 bedroom apartment. I hated my apartment. I hated, my neighbors. I hated the fact that I was in school. I wasn't making any money. I wasn't in a relationship. So I only looked at the lack and the things that I didn't have instead of focusing on the positive.
But how did you, I mean, so yeah, so you're sitting in that apartment, you basically are saying, my life sucks. So how did you, like, that's a secret sauce. How do you make that switch when when your environment is saying that, there's, yeah, your life sucks.
Yeah. So I started being grateful for the little things.
Okay.
And I started bringing the gratitude in. And what I did is I started a gratitude practice with my son, who was then 18 months, 2 years old.
Are you
And
still
so
living with your boyfriend? Or
nope,
no?
my
Okay.
ex and I had broken up when my son was 9 months old. So
Oh, okay.
shortly after that, I met this friend that came over and said all these things to me. I started putting things out there in the universe. Universe, please put me on my path. Universe, please bring me the signs to know, how to live my life's purpose. And the secret had told me that I needed to buy or I needed to start a gratitude journal. And the
Mm,
secret also talked about creating a vision board.
mm,
So I bought a journal, and when I tell you that on the first page, if there was 3 sentences, it was a lot because I really had a hard time being grateful. And I made my first vision board. And on that vision board, I knew I wanted to be a motivational speaker. I knew I wanted to be an author. I knew I wanted to travel the world. And I knew I wanted to find love. Though that was the basis of that vision.
mm-hmm.
And at the time, I was 250 pounds. I was living on food stamps. I was completely miserable, right? So I'm like, who is going to listen to me? Like, what do
Yeah.
I have to talk about? But truth be told, is by that point, I was already an entrepreneur. I was an entrepreneur at the age of 21. I had already owned businesses. I just wasn't a successful entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
My businesses were jobs that I bought for myself, right? So it was like enough to get by, but it wasn't enough to thrive.
Yeah.
And so I started being grateful with my son at night. I would be grateful for his giggle. I would be grateful for touch. I would be grateful for the beautiful room that I had created for him.
Mm-hmm.
If it was summertime, I would be grateful that the air conditioner was on. Even though I hated the window air conditioner, I would be grateful that I had air conditioning, right?
Yeah.
I would be grateful for Wi Fi because at the time, Facebook was already a thing. So I had access to the outside world. And I started being grateful for things that I really took for granted, right?
Yeah.
I would put my shoes on and I would be grateful for shoes. And what would happen is I would get into these bouts of grief where I would grieve my father and I would start crying uncontrollably. And when I would cry for him, I would stop myself by gratitude. I would
Mm.
start thinking about all of the children that didn't have fathers, all of the children that were beaten by their fathers, all of the
Mhm.
children who were raped by their fathers. And
Mhm.
it would immediately take me out of victim mode and put me into a state of gratitude. And
Mhm.
I would be grateful for the time that I had with my father. I'd be grateful that he was such an amazing father. And I would shift every time I took myself into victim, I would shift myself out because I was aware,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But before my friend had said those words to me, like, wow, you're a really negative person, I wasn't aware that I
Right.
was so negative, right?
Right.
Because we're surrounded by who we are. So I was surrounded by all people who were negative and complained.
Yeah. Yeah. And would like you didn't really mention the relationship with your mom. Was she one that lacked gratitude, would you say?
Yeah, I would say.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
Um, it's been a journey with my mom. It
Okay.
really has been a journey. And I've done a lot of mommy healing work.
Okay.
And it's interesting. I actually just did an Akashic record with Lynn, and she pulled out information on my mom. And she said that my mother and I have been sisters in many lives,
Mm.
that we
Mm.
were sisters, that I was her mother, and that she's been my mother before. So this relationship has been ongoing for lifetimes.
Mhm.
And in our past lifetimes, there's been a lot of jealousy.
Mm.
And when she said that, I was like, huh, like that sounds very familiar, right?
Mhm.
Very familiar
Mhm.
with what's happening in this life. And, I always chalk things up to culture because of the Russian culture and the stereotype
Yeah.
on that. But having that Akashic record reading and hearing the things that were said to me, I was like, okay, I'm like, well, how do I heal this now? Because I feel like I've done a lot of the mommy healing work and I
Yeah.
still haven't completed that. So how do I do this now? So in that reading, she gave me tips on like what to do. So I was like, this morning, I'm like, maybe I'll do that now. And then I'm like, no, you know what? I'm not going to do that today because I'm recording a lot. I don't want to cry and have puffy face. Let me
Right,
wait
right.
until this weekend and let's do some mommy healing this weekend.
Yeah. Well, and there you go, right? Like, I mean, I think that's important to say is that, like, despite all your knowledge, despite all your life experiences, despite all the healing that we feel like we've done, it's an ongoing journey. And but your foundation is always gratitude. I think,
Yeah.
that's put very nicely. It's sort of because life is going to shift you out of, the higher frequencies of gratitude. And what do we do in order to get back? But like you said, awareness is pivotal. Like if you don't have the awareness, then then you're thinking about how much your life sucks.
Yes.
So
And so the way that I like to explain it to people is if you were to imagine life being like a roller coaster ride, and you have
yeah.
to imagine that you love a roller coaster for this
Yeah.
example, but imagine like you're super excited, right? You're going to get on this roller coaster and the adrenaline is pumping. And so this is when we're grateful, right? When we're
Mhm.
living a life of gratitude, we have this adrenaline, like things are going our way and we're happy and we're having like these great moments. And we get on the roller coaster and we start going, right? And when things start going really good, we actually forget to be grateful
Mm,
because we get used to the good times, right? We get
yeah.
into that autopilot where we forget to be grateful. And so we're on the uphill and then all of a sudden the gratitude, lack of the gratitude catches up to us. And so we go on this downward spiral. And all
Mhm.
of a sudden, when it rains, it pours, everything bad starts happening. We go into victim mode. Why me? Why this? Why? And then
Mhm.
all of a sudden, something happens and you catch a glimpse of gratitude again. And you have this moment where you're like, oh, I'm so grateful that that happened. And all of a sudden, the ride starts to balance out, right?
Mm,
And
mm,
things start going your way again. And then
mm,
all of a sudden, we're going
mm,
on that uphill again. Like,
mm,
I'm grateful, I'm
mhm,
grateful, I'm grateful. And then,
mhm,
boom, we stop.
mhm,
So
mhm.
that's why when I talk about gratitude, I don't just use gratitude as I am grateful. Gratitude is a practice. It
It
is
is.
the basis of my family dynamic. There is not a night in this house that we don't go to sleep without being grateful as a family now.
Mm,
It is the most special thing that I could have ever done for my children. Because now, with my husband, we have 5 kids between the both of us. So
mm,
I went from being a single mom of one to having 2 more children of my own and now 2 bonus kids. And the things that come out of my children's mouths, my little guy especially, he is so rooted in gratitude. Like
mm,
my children cry because like and I find myself doing this. Like I go through my days and I like just have moments where I stop because I'm so grateful, I'm so appreciative. But the other day I threw my kids a Valentine's Day dance with their homeschooling community and I did all the things. And my kids know that I did all the things. I decorated, I made platters, I made sure there was food, I hired a DJ. And that night, within 10 minutes of us being there, my little guy came up to me. He said, Mommy, thank you so much for throwing this party.
mm,
My friends are having such a great time. I so appreciate everything you did. And so that night, I'm putting them to sleep. And my little guy says to me, You are the best mom that I could have ever asked for
mm,
in this life, right? And I hear
mm,
those words and I think like I wish I could have said that about my mother, right? And I forgive her. I really do. Like I
mhm,
understand her life was so different and she didn't know the things that I know
mhm,
and then I went into my other guy's room and he starts sobbing. And he was like, Mommy, I'm so grateful. I so appreciate the things that you do for me. And he hugs me. He's like, I don't want to let go of you. I'm just so grateful. And I come back into my
mm.
bedroom and I look at my husband and I'm like,
Okay.
ah, like my heart is singing because there was a time where I would have looked you dead in the eye and told you, like, I do not like being a mom. I
Yeah.
do not
Yeah.
like the mom job. I
Ex-
will do anything besides for being a mom. I had postpartum really bad with my third. I would stay at work until 9, 10 o'clock at night so that I wouldn't have to come home and put my children to sleep.
yeah.
And so now to have created this environment
Mm,
where these little humans, like at 7 and 9 years old, they understand the things that took me almost 40 years to understand, and
Yes.
how different their lives are going to be because of that. And how many lives we're changing along the way because
Mm-hmm.
that this is the energy in which they show up to school at every day, and with their friends and their friends' parents. And, it's like, it's a ripple effect.
It's true. Like it's little things like and interesting too with the mom thing. Like something came out of my mom's mouth the other day that like she was sitting in gratitude, and that's not something that she would normally have said. So I'm like, this is working. I wasn't even thinking about it, but like now that you said it, like she is shifting a little bit more that way. But again, to no like fault of theirs, because
No,
that wasn't, I mean, maybe the Bible, like, I'm just trying to think, like, where would they have gotten this the importance, the knowledge about gratitude and energy, and I guess the only thing would have been Christianity, I suppose, but not the way that it's, the language we're talking right now is not, it's more like spiritual. Yeah, it's more spirituality than it is
yeah.
religion based. So that makes sense.
And
Yeah.
what the greatest lesson is, because I've been doing this for 20 years. So
Yeah.
the more that I grow, the more that I evolve, the more that I heal, the people around me are doing the
Yes.
same, right? So you saw
Yes.
it with your mom. It's happening with my mother too,
Yeah.
but she has not yet stepped up to do her own work.
Right.
So I'm doing the healing on the ancestral line, but there's only so
Mhm.
much that I could do because she's still here. So
Right.
because she's still here, earthbound, she has this opportunity to do this healing on her own. The question is, does she want to, or does she
Yeah.
still understand it? I don't even know if she really gets it yet.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so you mentioned like acupuncture. So where did that all, like, I mean, so you got babies, you're on your own, you step into
Mhm.
gratitude, like you said you were going to school. Was that what you were going to school for?
Yep. So what happened is my ex and I broke up
Yeah.
3 days after Christmas. For Christmas, he had bought me a gift certificate to go to a psychic. And there was
Mm.
supposed to be supposedly this really great psychic. So I went to the psychic. It had been the first time in many years that I had ever gone to a psychic, because my dad didn't like psychics, because when he was little, a gypsy told him that he was going to die at a very young age.
Interesting.
And so when he was sick, I got scared to go to a psychic because I didn't want them to tell me that he was going to die.
Yeah.
So I remember walking in there, and the charge of the energy was the first time that I had felt that in a really long time. And so I sat down, and she gave me the cards, and she said, in your mind's eye, I want you to ask the cards a question. So the question was, did I make the right decision by leaving my son's father? So she flips over the first card, and she said, you made the right decision. He's not the right guy for you. And I was like, because I
This
did
is
not
good.
say that question out loud, right? And so she goes to flip the second card, and she said, just so you know, I'm a medium and I can connect to the other world. Is there anybody that you might want to connect with? And I said, maybe, because I didn't want to tell her anything. And she said, well, your father is coming through. And I was like, ah. And she's like, well, maybe it's your grandfather. She's like, no, it's your father. And she started explaining him to me, and then like chills all over my body. I wish I could have recorded that session
I
and like
know.
kept it with me for life.
Yeah.
But the things that I remember her saying was that my son had a gift, and that he was going to turn to me to develop that gift because I had the same one.
Mm.
And I remember sitting in that moment like, what kind of gift do I have? Because I was actually an event planner at the time.
Mm.
And I'm like, what, like, is he going to be a party planner? Like,
Yeah.
what's going on? And then she had like a lot of things to say about my father, and she made a lot of comments that it was just so real. So before I left that little psychic shop that day, I had purchased a deck of angel cards, which I had never owned before.
Mhm.
I had purchased a chakra CD meditation and something else. And the next day or 2 days later, I was at a plastic surgeon office with my mom, who is going through breast cancer for the second time. And she was having a really hard time with it because she had already lost one breast. So now she was about to lose a second breast. And in that moment, I was like, I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be helping people, and I'm supposed to be healing people in a very different way. And so I put on this meditation as we were waiting, and it came to me that I needed to go to school for massage out of everything, because my ex never wanted me to be a massage therapist. He had this thing where he didn't want me touching other men. So I was like, you know what? This is like a F you to him. I'll go to massage school, whatever.
Yeah.
And so within days, I was already in massage schools trying to figure out where I was going to go. Within 2 weeks, I think I had started a program. 3 weeks into massage school, I was like, oh, I cannot do this for the rest of my life. This is just not going to work for me.
Yeah.
But it was the very first time that I heard the word acupuncture. And so I knew nothing about acupuncture. I knew nothing about Reiki. I didn't know about these healing energetic modalities. So it was a stepping stone of learning. And this is my ex and I had just recently broken up. And so when he would take my son, it was very hard for me those first couple of months to readjust without having my child for several nights. And then slowly I really started to enjoy it, because on the nights that my son would go to my ex's, I would go to healing circles and I would go learn a new modality. And I just really engulfed myself in learning and healing and doing all the things. And so the universe reconnected me to an old friend from high school. And I went to his house this one day, and I remember his wife being the most socially awkward human being I had ever met. And I didn't care for her at all. And this was, we're going back like 13 years, 14 years. So this was in the land of Facebook, where I only had like 200 friends, right? So when she friended me on Facebook, I was like, I have to be friends with this person. Like, I really didn't care for her at all. And so a couple of weeks went by, and they invited me to a birthday party for their daughter. I had nothing else to do. I show up to their house, and these two were not party planners at all. And so I scooped in with my skill set. And by the end of the party, I was talking to her. And I remember on Facebook, she had so many questions for me. When are you graduating from massage school? Where are you going to be working? Do you have an office? And I'm like, why does this girl have so many questions for me? So all of a sudden at the end of the party, she was like, hey, I want to hire you. And I'm like, really? And she's like, I'm an acupuncturist and I'm looking for a massage therapist. She's like, and I'll pay you $1 a minute. And I was like, cha-ching, these were food stamp days. That was a lot of money. And so I was like, okay, but I was having surgery that week. And she was like, well, I can come do an acupuncture session for you. It'll help you heal. So that following day after my surgery, she came to my house and she needled me and she did a treatment for me. And then afterwards, she was laying in my bed and she was my soul sister. This socially awkward person was that weirdo that I was, right? But I just was better in a crowd of people. She was not. So when we were one-to-one and we had the opportunity to speak and to, get to know each other, I'm like, oh, you're crazy like me. Like a small connection.
Wow.
And it was beautiful. And in that moment, she said, you need to go to acupuncture school. And she's like, it'll change your whole entire life. And so the next day I called the acupuncture school and I said, I'd like to come in and have a meeting. And so I went and I met with the dean and he was like, do you have any questions for me? I was like, no. And he's like, you don't have any questions? I'm like, no, I was told that I needed to come here. And so here I am.
Yeah. Wow.
And the massage program that I had gone to was kind of like a BS program. So I didn't really actually realize what I was getting myself into when I went to acupuncture school. I didn't realize it was like this whole master's program.
Yeah.
After my meeting with the dean, he sent me to the bursar's office and it was like $55,000 or $60,000. And I remember leaving the office, calling my girlfriend. I'm like, this is a really expensive spiritual journey.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
I'm like, I'm single mom. I'm on food stamps. Like, I can't afford this. She's like, you have to afford it. She's like, you don't understand. Like, you'll make your money back in the first year. You just have to figure out how to pay for it.
Yeah.
And so I told nobody that I was joining this school because my mother would have talked me out of it. My brother would have talked me out of it. At that point, I had already had 30 careers. One of my books will be called 30 Careers by 30 Years Old. I could not hold on to anything. So nobody would have been like, sure, you should go spend this money on this career, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And my ex was the only one that knew because I was going to need help with my son. And he was like, you're effing crazy. That was the response. I'm like, okay, we already know this.
Yes. Yeah.
And I figured it out. By the grace of God, I figured it out. I don't even know how I did it because I literally didn't pay for a thing for like the first 2 years. I maybe got a loan for $13,000. And at the very end, I manifested the money to pay because you couldn't take the board exams without paying in full. And I ended up doing it. And acupuncture school completely changed my life. I didn't understand food. I didn't understand energy. I didn't know how to properly eat. When I was in high school, I would eat gummy bears, pizza, bagels, McDonald's. Like, I hated the food that my mother was serving in the house. So I just went the American way.
Yeah.
And I blew up because of my pregnancy, but then I couldn't lose any of the weight.
Right.
And so I started learning about gluten. I started learning about dairy. I started learning about all of these things. And then I met my now husband who owned a produce company. And I'm like, this is great. Now I'll start juicing.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. Okay. So when did you lose the weight? I'm kind of curious about that. Like through acupuncture school or?
Yeah, through acupuncture school, I started losing the weight. So at my heaviest, I was about 255. When I met my now husband, I was about 190.
Wow.
And then in that first literally days before I met him, I had decided to go gluten-free.
Yeah.
And so when we first started dating, like the bread basket would come and I looked at him. I'm like, if you eat a piece of bread in front of me, I'll never go out with you again.
I love that. The boundaries are very clear. Yeah.
My boundaries were very clear with him. He was also very overweight.
Okay.
And so in the lessons that I learned at that point in my life was to stop judging people when I first met. Right? Like this girlfriend of mine who became my soul sister, who's still a very dear friend of mine, had I written her off, I wouldn't have gone down the path that I went on. You know?
Yeah.
My husband was almost 300 pounds when we met. He was 47 years old. I was 31. 3 days prior, if you would have told me that I was about to date a 47-year-old, my response would have been, ew.
Yeah, exactly.
I thought 47 was so old.
Yeah.
And if you would have told me that I was going to date a man who was so overweight, I would have been like, absolutely not.
Yeah.
So I felt like the universe was testing me. Like now looking back in hindsight, I see that I was being tested on a very major level.
Yeah. So how did you trust your intuition then? Because like you must have used your skills by that time about energy work, like to even entertain the idea of going out with him.
I mean, honestly, the night that we had met, it was a setup. Not that I was being set up with him, but I had this group of women that I hung out with during that time. We were called the MILF Squad. It was all moms that were beautiful women. Most of them were married and were in relationships, but we would go out and they had men flocking to them. And these guys would buy us drinks and they would buy us dinner and they would all cheat on their husbands. And I was just so grateful to be in their presence because a free meal was like a really big deal for me.
Yeah.
So like to be able to go out and have a cocktail, not have to pay for it, have a good time. I was just so grateful to be in the presence of this. And so what had happened is it was Thursday night. My one girlfriend called me and she owned a hair salon. These were also pretty successful women. She owned a hair salon and she had stopped drinking at the time. And she was like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm sick. So I know now that I was going through an up level, but she was like, are you going to be sick on Tuesday? I'm like, I hope not. It's Thursday. And she was like, do you want to go to Atlantic City? And I'm like, oh, I would love to go, but I don't really have the money to go. So for those of you watching, Atlantic City is a town of all casinos.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, I didn't have the money to do that. And she was
No.
like, no, you don't need any money. I'm like, what do you mean I don't need any money?
Ooh.
And she's like, there's these guys, they own a business up the street from my house, up the street from my business. They called me and asked me if I wanted to bring some friends. They're going to get us a room. They'll buy us dinner. They even said that they would give us money to gamble with. And I'm like, no way.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
like, that's the kind of stuff you see in the movies. Like that does not happen in real life. And the evidence in my life was that guys would promise me the world and they would never deliver. So I
Mm.
did not have a very big trust in men at that time. And she was like, no, you don't understand. Like, I've known these guys for a long time. Like, they're clients of mine. Like, we'll have a great time. Do you want to go? She was like, I don't want to invite anybody else because I don't want it to be this whole cocktail fest because I'm really trying to not drink. So I was
Mhm.
like, okay, it just so happened that my ex took my son on Tuesday nights. So I
Mhm.
was free. And I said, I just have to be back at school on Wednesday. I had class Wednesday at like 3 p.m. So she was like, no problem. We'll come back. Okay. So she picks me up. We're in the car, we're driving. And I said to her, like, what is the deal like with these guys? I'm like, are these like all old, dirty, like married
Yeah,
men? And she
yeah.
was like, yes, that's exactly what they are.
Oh
And
God.
I'm like, okay, perfect. Like, so in my mind, I'm like, I'm just going to get a free meal, like
Yeah,
spend the night, and that's it. Like I had
yeah.
no intention. Like I was just gonna have a good time and
Right,
kind of it.
right.
And so we show up, and the guy, Ben, who is now my
Yes.
husband, came down to greet us with this other guy. And there was like something about his energy. Like it wasn't like
Mhm.
I'm so attracted to him, but
Mm.
like energetically, I felt something off of him. And we went up to their suite. And it was like something I had never seen before. There was all this fruit and all these bottles of wine and like all these older men. And I'm like, this is so weird.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
such a strange scenario for me. And then all of a sudden I smelled marijuana. And I'm like, do these
Mm.
guys smell pot? Like smoke pot? Like what is happening right now?
Mhm.
And I'm like, who's smoking pot? And they're like, oh, well, like Ben has pot. I'm like, really? So I like walk around and I see him sitting on the bed and he's on the phone and I sit down next to him. He puts his hand on my back and I'm like, there was something in the way that he
Mm.
touched me. And so I had not smoked pot in like years. And
Yeah.
so I'm like, are you going to smoke that today? He was like, yeah. I'm like, can I try a little? And he was like, yeah, of course. So it was like college. We went to the bathroom. We put a towel under the door. Another guy was in there that kind of set this whole thing up. And after I took a couple of hits, I'm like, oh my God, I don't know what's going to happen to me. Like, you're responsible for me for the rest of the night. And he's like, I got you until dinner. And I'm like, okay, great.
Okay.
And so we ended up going to another room where there were more people. This was like a rah-rah event that he was throwing for his employees at work.
Okay.
And he happened to not like his CEO, and I didn't know this. And at that point, I was, a little intoxicated. And so I started messing with this one guy, and I was making everybody laugh. Like everybody was just like very amused by me. And so we went up to go get ready for dinner, and it hit me that maybe they asked my girlfriend to come to this dinner because he was interested in her. So when we went to dinner, I sat on the other side of the table from him, and she sat next to him. And me and his assistant were like the masters of ceremony. We were having the whole table like rolling. I was like, nobody should eat bread because I was gluten free for 2 days. I was trying to get the whole table to be gluten free with me. And the second dinner was over, we were like glued together like magnets. Like we could not separate, Ben and I. We went back to our hotel. My girlfriend went up to the room because she didn't want to drink. She didn't want to gamble.
Yeah.
I ended up staying on the casino floor with him. And the rest is
It's
history from there.
history.
We've been together ever since.
Okay, so are you saying that you never really came down from the high?
Um, My life has been a lifetime movie. I have been
Okay.
through highs and lows. And, again, for those of you that are watching, Lifetime movies are very dramatic, traumatic.
Yeah.
Ben had a wife. He had a ring on. He was very much married, but the relationship was over long before I ever came into the picture.
Yeah.
That night after we gambled, we went up to his room. We started talking about our life. He started telling me about his kids. I started telling him about my son. And he started telling me, like, my wife does not love me. I left her 5 years ago. I went back because I missed being with my kids.
Yeah.
And at some point, I dropped my wine glass and it shattered like something out of a movie. It shattered on the floor. And we both of us started picking up the pieces and we kissed. And it was an energetic match like I had never experienced before. And couple days later, he called me and I was leaving for Miami that weekend. And he was like, I really would like to pick you up from the airport when you come home. And I'm like, well, that's like a week from now. I don't want to wait an entire week to see you. And I'm like, you should come to Miami. And he was like, that is so tempting right now. Like, don't tempt me like that. I'm like, no, really, you should come to Miami. Like, why not? And he was like, Shill, if you ask me again, I'm going to come. And so I'm like, come to Miami. So he hangs up the phone. 2 hours later, he calls me and he was like, I just bought a flight. I'll see you on Monday.
Wow.
And so he flew down to Miami and he picked me up, and I was with my girlfriend and she had other friends that were in visiting, and we were all going out to dinner together. And I have to tell you, Luella, I was super embarrassed and super ashamed in that moment.
Yeah.
Here was this guy who was married, who was, not like this tall, dark, and handsome, even though I do think he's tall, dark, and handsome. Like in that moment, he wasn't the physical appearance of what I normally had gone through. And he put on a shirt for dinner that had stains on it. And I was like so embarrassed. I'm like, oh my God, I'm taking you out in public with me right now. And then we went to dinner and literally everybody just fell in love with him. Like he is the most kind-hearted, loving human being I have ever met in my life. And, we've been through a roller coaster, like a complete wave. 2 weeks after we met, he came to my apartment, showed up to my apartment on a Saturday night. I'm like, what are you doing here? Like, you should be home right now. And he's like, I'm going to leave my wife. And I was like, no, you can't do that, because here I was like this very high spiritual person, right? Like I had dedicated my life to spirituality, and this was like the ultimate sin. Like, how am I doing this right now? And he was like, no, you don't understand. Like, I'm in love with you. Like, you're my soulmate. I manifested you. He's like, you were manifesting me and I was manifesting you. And that's actually how I knew when we first checked into that room in Miami. The very first thing that came out of his mouth was thank you. And I'm like, did this man just say thank you? Like, I'm the goddess of gratitude. I wasn't the goddess of gratitude then, but my whole life was based in gratitude. And the first thing he said was thank you. And so we laid there and for weeks we cried. I mean, we felt terrible. I felt terrible. Like I didn't want to be the other woman. And I have to be honest, there was a time in my life where I would have hooked up with a married man and not even thought twice about it.
Right.
But not at that point in my life. At that point in my life, I was looking for pure, unconditional love. And so it was a journey. That divorce took 6.5 years.
Wow.
Yep. And the day after the divorce, I was like, where's my ring? Like, I thought that we were going to get married right away. And he was like, no, I don't want to get married now. And I'm like, oh, what do you mean you don't want to get married now? And at this point, we already had 2 children together.
Wow.
And so we just got married on 11/11 after being together 11 years. And it took living through COVID together to really get to that place. I mean, so no, it hasn't always been a high. It's like any other relationship. We went through a lot of highs and lows. And, I thought that the divorce was the hardest thing we ever had to live through, but then we had to live through COVID. And like I said earlier, he owns a produce company.
Yeah.
So when the world shut down, the restaurants shut down, and we lost almost $800,000 in fresh produce.
Wow.
And within a week, he had to fire 48 employees. And I had to go work at the warehouse, and it became such a disaster. I went into trauma. I thought that I was going to be living on food stamps again. Like, it was such a tumultuous time. But what had happened during that time was so beautiful. Our love grew so much stronger. We conquered it together. We pivoted his business. We figured out a way to keep it alive. I kept my acupuncture practice alive, and our love grew stronger. And then one day I was like, let's get married on New Year's Eve. And he was like, chill, I thought we were done with this. And I'm like, well, if ever like I proved my love to you, like
Yeah.
COVID was it, right? Like if
Yeah.
we just live through this and like
Yeah.
you don't know that I'm in it forever, like, and so he was like, you know what? I'm gonna marry you. And so that New Year's Eve, he actually proposed to me.
Mm.
And 11/11/22, we got married.
Wow. Okay. So I'm just sort of like in summary, then I'm just thinking about, okay, relationships and doubt and fear and persistence. And so like how did you lead yourself through the doubts and fears? Because there must have been in during that time. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
It was hard because I consider myself to be a very highly emotional, intelligent woman now.
Ex- yes, yes.
But when we were living through the heart of the divorce, I was not.
Yeah.
And I was very much a child, and I was very much, it's all about me. And
Okay.
he had
Yeah.
2 children from this previous relationship, and I hated every other weekend when it wasn't my weekend and he still wanted to go be with his children.
Okay.
And,
Yeah.
I hated her because
Yeah.
she was the devil in my relationship and she blamed me for everything, which, I understand, but she took
Yeah.
no responsibility for her
Right.
part in that marriage
Yeah.
failing.
Yeah.
And it was hard. And I
Yeah.
had to lean into my spiritual work. And, I went to go see a spiritual therapist and I did a lot of law of reflection work. And then
Hmm.
during COVID, I did a lot of shadow work. And, I wrote letters to her and I ripped them up. And then I did
Yeah.
forgiveness work. And little by little by little by little, I really started to bring myself to a greater compassion for other
Hmm.
people. And in the end, I had this deep gratitude for our life together and our
Yeah.
love.
Yeah.
Regardless of everything, regardless of the highs and the lows, our love is so beautiful and it's so special. And not everybody gets to experience that. And then
Mm.
we created these amazing human beings together.
Hmm.
And so I'm always rooted in love and gratitude. It always comes back to this place of love and gratitude. And for many years, I lived with the shame of being the other woman, of
Mm.
being the homewrecker, of being,
Hmm.
the bitch, the slut, the whore, the
Yes.
things that people called me were just so horrible.
Wow.
And I lived through all of that and I survived all of that. And something happened around our 10-year mark together. Around our
Yeah.
10-year mark together, I had like this cathartic moment of healing. And our relationship has never been a secret. We've never kept our story a secret, but
No.
I actually went public with our story on Facebook and
Okay.
with his permission, of course.
Yeah.
And it was so beautifully received.
Mm.
And there were so many people who were experiencing the same.
Exactly.
And we don't talk about these things, right? It's like so
No.
shameful. Like the woman who's being cheated on, she doesn't want to talk about that. And the woman who is cheating or the man who is cheating, nobody wants to talk about that.
Yeah.
And so me talking about it out loud gave people the opportunity to heal, which in turn healed us as well.
Exactly. So it was a combination of self-healing plus also, giving him the compassion that you were sort of giving yourself, right? I'm guessing like not everything he was doing during COVID and during, those times were like, oh my God, I love you so much. I'm sure like there was times where you're looking at him going, this is not working. But
Oh, yeah.
right, like, so it was self-compassion, self-love transmitted to him that was the glue that kept you guys together, and
Yeah.
it sounds like you both have healed. during the
Yeah. Well,
process. And
also, I went really deep into doing shadow work, and, I
for
started hiring
for for
mentors.
our listeners, what is shadow work?
So, shadow work is this part in your subconscious mind that stores things in this life and past lives.
Yeah.
So, a lot of times we're operating out of a place of fear, or there's things that, like one day you're fine and the next day you're like, what the hell is happening in
Hmm.
my life, right? Because we cycle through patterns of our life. So women cycle through 7, men cycle through 8. So those first 7 years of our life are so important. If you had any kind of trauma, somebody yelled at you, told you you weren't good enough, you stored those experiences in your subconscious and in your body. And
Mm-hmm.
so things happen throughout our lives that trigger those things into existence, but you don't understand that they're happening because these were things of the past, right?
Yeah.
And so I'll give you a great example. When I was 21 years old, I had gotten a tattoo on my body. It looks like a yin yang, but it was like a tribal thing. And that was a very tumultuous summer for me. I had a lot of sister wounds that happened that summer. And it was like a beach house that I had rented with sorority sisters. And a couple of years ago, I was in this cycle of 7. And we were in Aruba, and I was struggling. Like, I was having a really hard time there. And I'm like, I don't, like, what is wrong with me? I don't know. Like, something was wrong with me. It was in the middle of COVID. And I decided to steam my dress while the dress was on my body. I don't suggest anybody does this at home.
Oh God.
And so while I did that, I burned myself, obviously. And the burn mirrored that tattoo.
Oh.
And so I'm staring at this now scar that I have, and it brought me back to that summer. And I started doing the healing work around that summer. And I started forgiving my girlfriends, and I started forgiving the guys that were in my life. I started forgiving myself because that was a heavy summer of drugs and alcohol.
Mm.
And I went through this process of healing. And if you were to look at my hip right now, it is not even there. And I'm
Oh.
talking, I had like a 3rd-degree burn on my body.
Wow.
But I needed to experience that to take me back. And that's because I'm so aware
Yeah.
and conscious of the things that I'm living through because of the things that I've learned. So during COVID, when I did the shadow work, not only did I heal this life, I went back into past lives. Because
Mm.
what happened at the start of COVID is I started getting canceled.
Mm.
So I
Mm.
had
Mm-hmm.
created a brand in 2017 where I was the goddess of gratitude. And the goddess of gratitude only talked about gratitude and
Right.
unicorns and rainbows and positive things and how great my life is and all the things. And so what I didn't realize is that I also have psychic abilities. And when COVID was coming, I knew that COVID was coming.
Mm.
If you go back and you listen to my lives from January of 2020, I say things like something is coming that's going
Mm.
to mandate vaccinations. It's going to be worldwide. Like I was prophesizing what was happening. And so when I first heard COVID, I was like, oh, this is it. Like, this is what
Mm.
I was saying. I could have never imagined that it was going to be what it was.
Mm.
But while the whole world was quarantining and afraid to live life, I was at Home Goods buying organizers because I'm like, this is crazy. This is going to be
Yeah.
a while. Like, I knew. So all of a sudden, the goddess of gratitude became very angry. And I had
Mm.
that reactive behavior that I talked about
Yeah.
earlier. So I was very public with my feelings, with
Okay.
my thoughts. And I thought that the whole world was going to wake up. I really
Mm.
thought that people were just going to see very clearly what was happening.
Mm.
And one by one, like family after family, I'm like, hey, you want to have a play day? And they were like, oh no, we have to quarantine. And I'm like, hey, you guys want to get together? Oh no, we have to quarantine. Just 2 weeks, just 2 weeks. And I'm like, no, you guys don't understand.
Yeah.
And people had a really hard time because of the way that I presented myself. I was on a
Mm.
pedestal, right?
Mm.
And suddenly I knocked myself off the pedestal and I became very human.
Okay.
And people did not like that.
Right. Right.
And so my brand took a hit.
Yeah.
I had people that were contacting my mentors, telling them that they would never work with them because they work with me. I mean, the
Oh,
lengths that people went to try to destroy
wow.
me in that time. And so I leaned into my relationship. I leaned
Yeah.
into my spiritual work, and in the shadows, I saw lifetime after lifetime that I was a truth teller. I was a truth
Mm,
seeker. I had gotten burned at a stake. I had gotten crucified. I had gotten beheaded. I mean, it was like, and every time I would do one of these sessions, I'd be like, okay, well, nobody's going to chop my head off in this life. I mean, it kind of
right.
felt like it, but
Yeah,
like not
exactly.
actually, right? And
Yeah.
nobody's going to come to my door with a stake, nobody's going to burn me,
Yeah.
and they're not going to crucify me, even though it felt like that's what was
Yes.
happening. The reality was it's not going to happen that way.
Yeah.
And so I did massive amounts of healing on myself. And because of that, when you heal yourself, you heal everybody around you.
Yes,
It's
exactly.
inevitable.
Yeah. It's that
So my
ripple.
husband appreciates that. And
Mm-hmm.
because of the expansion that I've done for myself, I've also expanded him. And like I said, from the minute I met him, he was already a spiritual being. Like he
Yes.
didn't get that from me, but
Right.
I've expanded him and I've allowed for him to heal and I've allowed for him to grow. And, even now, I shared with our group that my son failed a class and I felt like
Yeah.
I had to punish him, right? Because
Right.
that's what we're trained to do.
Yes.
And so I didn't tell my husband about the situation for several days. And then when
Yeah.
I finally told him, he went into that old paradigm of like, well, he should be grounded and he shouldn't be doing this and he shouldn't be doing that. And I said, I've got this and
Yeah.
I'm going to handle this in a different way. And he looked at me and he was like, who
Yeah.
are you?
Yeah. 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 Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. But
Because I'm normally the person who's super reactive, who yells, who, I feel like there's got to be suffering. And I'm trying to live a life without suffering now.
you're leading your life with love, it sounds
Yeah.
like. Yeah. And
And from pure example.
yeah, because love is the highest frequency, right?
Yeah.
It's beautiful. So what a story. I wish,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, like yeah, we both have to go actually. But it's yeah, I think just your story has encompassed so many different. I think we covered a lot of ground. And the
Everything.
the the one last thing I want to, highlight though is how your relationship became stronger from one person doing the work.
Yeah.
Even though your husband is spiritual and all that, I mean, you didn't, I'm guessing you didn't drag him to, couples counseling or whatever, right?
I
And saying,
did.
oh, you
I did.
did. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So were
Yes,
you
I
were you
did.
pointing the finger at him saying, you're the problem, or
No, I mean,
okay.
yes, I've done that. Everything's his fault, right? Um, but it was me doing the work and it was me communicating. There was a lot of communication that happened in our relationship. And I went through a what is it called? A seven-year itch, right? You heard that, the
Yeah.
7-year itch. So I had the 7-year itch, and
Mm,
at 7 years together, we weren't sleeping in the same bed together
yep.
because he after my pregnancies, we both gained a lot of weight. I
Yep.
had lost the weight, he didn't.
Mm,
He was not taking care of himself. He was snoring. We couldn't
yep.
sleep in the same bed, and I started doing things and behaving in a way that was out of character. And luckily, we were seeing a spiritual therapist, and she helped me to understand what happens when you drink. That they're called spirits for a reason, because when we drink alcohol, we actually detach from our body, but we're tethered with a cord. And so, when you go into a bar and stuff, they're usually dark places because there's entities that live in there and
Mm,
they're waiting for you to get drunk so that they could take over your body. So they're waiting for somebody who's already in a poor state of mind that wants to disconnect, right? So when we use alcohol as a disconnect, we're literally, so there's two ways to use alcohol. You could use alcohol as a disconnect, which most people do, or you could use alcohol for a connection. So at that point in my life, I was using it as a disconnect. And so every time I drank, I was doing things and behaving, poorly. I never cheated on him, but I was borderline. And so I would tell him, like, I would be honest with him. And I'm like, listen, like, if we don't do something, I'm going to do something that I'm going to regret. And we started going to this therapist together. And it was communication. And I am really good at communicating now, which I wasn't always. And, I was a yeller, a criticizer. I was not who I am now. So, when you see this and I'm like in La La Land and I have the best relationship and I'm so in love, it's taken a lot of work to get here.
Exactly.
But that was at the 7-year marker. And now we're approaching 12 years together. So, really in these last 5 years and really in the land of COVID, because in the land of COVID, I got so triggered that I was going to go back on food stamps that like my whole life just looked like it was, in a heartbeat.
Reactive, right? That's what you're saying. You're in fight and flight and flight. Yeah.
This is the first time in my entire life that I'm living without anxiety, that I'm calm in my body, that I don't feel the need to react. Like I can have somebody screaming in my face and I can take a deep breath and I can like wait to respond. I wasn't like that. And so I literally don't know how to live without suffering. So these last couple of months, I'm stuck in like a cycle of sabotage because then I turn to food, I turn to alcohol, I turn into these habits because I feel like I need something to suffer over.
Right.
Because I'm not used to being happy all the time.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's like a wild paradigm to live in.
That's a good point. Okay, so we do have to go, but tell us but you got the awareness now that you are self-sabotaging so that you can pull yourself out of it again. Okay, perfect. And okay, so what if people want to work with you now, knowing that you've lived 1,000 lives and how do you work your wisdom or your...
Find me all over social media. My website is shilamida.com. You just have to spell my name correctly. It's SHILAMIDA. I work with clients one-to-one. I do full health history. So if anybody is suffering with medical things and you need like a total revamp of your life, I'm able to work with that. I've been an entrepreneur since I was 21, so I can work with business people as well. I have on my website a shill shop. In the shill shop, you can find my books. My first book is called 31 Days of Gratitude, Create the Life You Desire. It's actually an interactive journal. So remember when I went back and said that first journal, I only had 3 sentences. I wrote this book to help the people that don't know how to be grateful.
Oh, that's
so there's
great.
sample affirmations every day. There's room for you to journal. My second book is called From Food Stamps to First Class. It's an autobiography of my life, and it's a self-help book. So at the end of every chapter, there's affirmations. My third book is a kid's book called I Am Grateful for My Life. So those are all available on my website as well as Amazon. On my website, you will also find courses that I've taught before. I have a course called Remedy, which teaches about holistic living. I have a course called the Goddess Academy, which teaches you how to go through the spiritual awakening process. There's master classes that I've taught before, so you can find those there. And I'm super active on social media. I love to respond to everybody. I take care of all my inboxes. So you can find me on Instagram at 50 Shades of Shilamida with the number 50. My Goddess of Gratitude page is still there, even though I story on 50 Shades. I have a YouTube channel, 50 Shades of Shilamida. I am on Pinterest as Shilamida, and you can find me on Facebook.
All right. Well, thanks so much for your time, and sorry to take up so much time, but I think it was a great interview. Thanks so much for that.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Okay. Talk soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks once again for joining me on another great episode of I Think I Can podcast. If you liked it, please subscribe below so you don't miss out on any future episodes. And until next week, treat each day like it was your last, because each new day is a privilege that we shan't take for granted. Cheers and have a great week. Bye-bye.